Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Migration Without Regret, Balancing Risk and Reward in Workload Automation Modernization. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be moderating today's event. Our featured speakers are Dan Twing, President and COO from Enterprise Management Associates, and Gert Adolphson, General Manager, North America at Beta Systems Software. Dan joined EMA in 2005 and has over 25 years of experience in information systems, software development, and technology outsourcing. Dan focuses on all aspects of intelligent and automated management of IT. Gert leads Beta Systems' Workload Automation Business Unit for the Americas. He has over 30 years of experience in the software industry, centering around workload automation, managed file transfer, and migration projects. And before I hand things over to Dan and Gert, I wanted the audience to know that we will be concluding today's presentation by taking your questions. You can log them anytime by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback, as well as a link to receive a complimentary copy of the EMA radar report. So be on the lookout for that email. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Dan Twing. Dan?
Thanks, Raleigh. I'm going to back up to the title slide for just a moment. I chose this image to make the point, migration without regret. I mean, I think you really do need to be fierce in this period of time with automation, with all of what's happening with AI and other things. Automation is really becoming a key point within organizations in support of advancements in productivity and systems that can sort of help monitor and even heal themselves as AI is brought online. And if you're on the wrong platforms, it's going to hold you back to be able to take advantage of these other things. So this image to me speaks to the sort of attitude towards this, which is be fierce. Think about it in its entirety to how it impacts your business. So the first slide here, certainly anytime you're going to change a major system, and workload automation software is certainly a very key major system, there are definitely risks and there's rewards. And you have to make those trade-offs. You want to gain efficiency, agility, AI and cloud readiness, and you want that to outbalance the risk, the effort, and the complexity. So part of what I'm going to answer today is that worth it? Has it been worth it for others? I've got some survey data that sort of talks about that. But first of all, what's driving change? Why are some folks more aggressive than others at upgrading the software? You really need to discover your why. A lot of times integration might be difficult with other aspects of modern IT, depending on the tool that you're on. Some vendors have gotten a lot more aggressive about out-of-the-box integrations. Several of the leading vendors have regular monthly new integrations that are just released consistently, because integrating with everything has really become the trend, not even within workload or automation, but across all IT. Every class of tool is still being AI'd up in every direction. So APIs in multiple directions. And so that may be a reason for you. Falling behind on cloud or containers or AI is another reason. Scripting overload. Some products got very, very powerful with great scripting tools, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And those very scripts that made them so great then are now a hindrance because they're difficult to maintain. And there's maybe better, more configurable feature means to achieve the same things. Limited visibility, weak business context, and so on. All of these things are reasons you may think it's time for a different software in this category. Or we're also seeing a pattern where more and more folks are choosing to add a new tool for a specific project where they need capabilities, and they delay that migration of the legacy stuff until they get more comfortable with the new tool. But we're certainly seeing a lot of churn in this market. So, when you look at, first of all, what's holding teams back from doing more with their workload automation solution? And this is from a survey I did in 2025. Beta Systems was one of the sponsors of this research. What factors prevent your organization from leveraging workload automation for new use cases? Top of the list, difficulty integrating WLA with new technologies or platforms, and lack of skilled resources or personnel. Now, the personnel thing really cropped up in the top of this list for the first time in 2025. We've seen it be more in the middle of the pack before. Usually security is higher, but in the last couple of years, just lack of trained resources is really becoming a hindrance. These tools have gotten a lot more powerful, but not all of the staff necessarily understands how to use it. And so a more modern tool that's easier to use is often the answer for that. So difficulty integration, and then skilled resources are really the top of the list for people who say the current tool, I can't get everything out of it that I want or need. Why might they change or stop using one? So those who are changing, and again, this data is a bit older. I hadn't asked this question in 24, but in 2023, we asked, what's driving the need to add or change to another workload automation software? And the cloud capabilities really top that list, along with better resource utilization. We get a lot of, as containers came up, Workload got smarter about containers. And so I think, in a lot of cases, it's the modern apps that are the reasons that people change their tool, because they're not getting all of the new features they might want or need in those areas. Likewise, the chart on the right side here, why'd you stop using one? So not just I switched off of it, but or I'm not just looking for another one, but here's one that I actually completely discontinued. Cost is often a big factor. We've seen a lot of repricing and the schemes for how these tools are incremented in billing, rather than old school means like by CPU or environment. In many cases now it's by job execution. And when those contracts get repriced, there can be significant cost changes, and that's often a reason somebody might decide to move. Or better tool and complexity to manage kind of is another way to say better tool, because some of the more modern tools are just easier to manage. So those are real reasons from your peers that have caused others to make these changes. You may be feeling some of those same things. So we also look at this complexity issue, and the migration may lead somewhere else, but is it really worth the pain or the effort? And you really kind of have to pick your pain. And what usually happens is you live with it far longer than you really probably should have. And when you finally get ready to do it, it's probably not going to be as bad as you thought. And you're going to realize that the things that were a problem maybe were a bigger problem you'd been living with than the scope of a migration really might become. So, a lot of those pain points that you may be living with, security and compliance concerns, lack of skilled personnel again, and so forth, at some point that scale is going to tip. And these are going to become big enough that you're going to think it's time. And it may be for a new tool for a specific set of new applications, and some of the legacy stuff will be addressed later, or it may be a full-on migration up front. Now, cloud.
And I think.
Oh, go ahead, Gert.
Yes, this is Gert. Hello to everyone. So I think one of the things we also see is that our clients' workload is ever increasing. At the same time, the IT departments are asked to do more with the same amount of resources, or maybe even less. And looking forward, we see that a lot of business units are experimenting with AI and how they can leverage AI in different contexts for their business, which again is going to drive a lot of increases in workloads because it's all data that needs to be processed, data that comes from other application streams. And if you have to manage a much higher workload with the same amount of resources, then you have to look at, is your tooling up to date? Can you really do that? Not just from a performance perspective, but also from the management aspect. As you said, in terms of just the personnel, if the solution is too complex, it takes more effort to manage a certain amount of workload. So if you can reduce the amount of effort it takes to manage a certain amount of workload, you can add more workload with the same amount of staff and resources.
Absolutely. And one of those areas being cloud, there's an awful lot of cloud work, and some of the products are better at it than others. And you know what product you're using and how it handles cloud currently, and you know where your challenges are. Um, but these broader use cases are very successful. So I'll talk in a minute about the different kinds of things that have been cropping up, and you're probably living with some of this. But cloud infrastructure automation, just you know what it takes to stand up clouds, especially in dynamic environments. A lot of that work is being done by these automation tools, both for on-prem as well, but significantly in the cloud. And automating that both brings productivity gains because it frees up staff, but it's also more certain to be accurate, because if the automation works and it's the same every time, you eliminate opportunities for human error and whatnot. So you get a lot of benefits there. But cloud, of course, is one of the major use cases, and it continues to expand. I mean, it's been around a while. 15, 16 years, these products have been doing various things with cloud. But even if you look here, just the satisfaction of the capabilities in this kind of cloud work had expanded again between 22 and 24 when this survey was run. So, I mean, we continue to see advancements made in cloud automation and cloud management from this class of tools. And if you're not getting that benefit from the tool you're on, you're missing out. And of course, Gert gave us some background on a lot of what's happening with AI, and a lot of what's going to happen is yet to happen. I think in Workload, there is a smattering of things that existed over the last 8 or 12 months, but the releases that are going to be in the next 6 to 8 months from all the major products are really ramping up the AI significantly. It's maturing, and that's going to really show up in releases this year. And so, as AI and observability are rising, here again, there's going to be capabilities that may or may not be in the tools you need. And yet, with everything else that's happening in IT in terms of complexity, all of the data handling, all of the AI stuff, you need these tools and this observability just to make sure it's all running correctly. So, when we look at the idea that 87% say observability is key to optimizing their workflows. So as we've been talking more and more about these tools as orchestrators, not just automators, but orchestrators of automation. And to orchestrate, you first have to be able to understand where you're at, the situation. And that's why, for me, observability is rising generally across IT as an issue. It's really rising within automation, because to orchestrate means to understand, and to understand means to have that observed data about what the environment is like. And many folks are understanding that. Not everybody is doing it yet. And of course, in terms of AI, there's a lot of expectations. There's only a few things that are there and a bunch that's on the way. Gert, I don't know if you have anything you want to add here.
Yes, I mean, one of the important things to look at is, of course, the architecture behind the workload automation suites and how well they're positioned for observability. If you have a tool that is 10, 20, some of the tools are 30 years old, then obviously they're not ideally architected for the level of observability and AI support that we'll need in the future. And this is, I think, also a major point to look at modern solutions that are cloud native, written in the cloud for the cloud, with modern, scalable microservices-based architectures.
Yes, it does make a huge difference. And with that as a backdrop, you know, there's really always a lot of churn and burn in this market. Not everyone who says they're looking around moves. They, you know, but there's a pretty steady 45 to 50 percent in 2024. 52.5% said, I'm actively looking at and considering other solutions. Now, whether that's to add a new one or to replace one, I didn't go to that depth in this particular survey, but this has been a pretty consistent 50 or 50% plus that, you know, are consistently understanding what's out there, and a lot of them are moving or adding. And you can see that here. This is data that I've got trended back to 2019. So I've been doing surveys in this market, you know, for a good 15 years now. These are the last 4 that where we were trending the number of products in use. So you go back to 2019, you know, just 6 years ago, and way over half the market lived on a single workload automation tool. You know, another 24%, the green line there, they had 2 products, and, you know, another 11, 12% had 3, and about 8% had 4 or more. And that can happen, not just, you know, it happens through acquisition. It happens for a lot of reasons, that there might have been multiple products even back then. But as time moves forward, you can absolutely see the trend to have 2 or even 3 products in use. And it's folks reaching for all of these new capabilities at different points in time, or just realizing that the goal of one, you know, one tool to serve us all maybe isn't the best course of action. And so what we see is folks using multiple tools and using them for fewer years than maybe they used to. We don't see them staying on these tools 20, 25 years anymore. You know, 4 or 5 years, and you may see somebody making a switch. So now this is data is from 2023. It's a couple years old now, that I really in that year dug into the migration idea. And I'm reaching back to that data because it's still pretty relevant and still pretty good. And we asked, you know, a basic Likert kind of question, you know, 5 points, you know, was this easier than I expected? Much easier than I expected, my migration? Was it harder or a lot harder? Or was it about what I expected? And, you know, when I see this data, and I remember when we first got this data back in 2023, lots of folks would nod. And when Gert and I were talking about this the other day, we're both kind of nodding too. It's sort of like you see about 46% said, hey, it was easier, even much easier. But you have an almost equal group who said it was harder or much harder. And anyone who's been doing IT as long as Gert and I have, understands that, in fact, you know, it can go either way for any organization at any time, right? It comes down to how well did you plan this one? What's the partner you have involved? Do they have the right tools? So it doesn't have to be scary or hard, but it does take the right partner and the right planning. And plenty of people found it to be very much easier than their expectations. Plenty found it to be harder. And it gets down to how well did you plan and who do you have helping you? Gert, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this. I can leave this up here, and if you want to comment here, and then Gert's going to talk to us a little bit about the things that Data Systems is doing to keep their clients on the green part of this chart and not the red part of this chart.
Yes, thanks, Dan. And I've been doing or managing migration projects since the mid-90s, so you have an idea of how old I am. And at the end of the day, IT, and especially IT operations, is always about managing risks. Each time we submit a job, that is a risk, but we have to do it. So we have the policies, procedures around the testing before we put something into production, all of the backout procedures and so on. What happens if something doesn't work? It's simply just another IT project to do a migration that we need to manage well and have a good plan. So I wanted to give you a little bit more deep dive into what such a migration project looks like. And first of all, in most instances, the objective is not just to migrate what you have today to a new system, but to end up with a less complex environment that's easier to manage and that allows you to run more workload with the same amount of people, and allow you to easier integrate with all of the new technologies that are coming that you'll have to integrate with. So as with any project, it starts with a thorough analysis of your current environment. What does it look like? Where are the complexities? Where are the interdependencies? To create a project plan and a timeline. And typically the migration will be a phased migration plan where you take different pieces in production, one at a time, by application area, by business unit, whatever makes sense and has the least amount of cross dependencies. So next slide, please, Dan.
There you go.
So we have a migration tool suite we call the Migration Factory that we've developed throughout the years that is very comprehensive. But it is not a one size fits all. We adapt it to each client's needs. So based upon the result of the analysis, we determine what are the things that are specific for this environment. Do we, for example, want to change the naming conventions in the migration? And obviously the migration migrates compatible concepts directly, and the other ones we'll talk about in a minute. But it also, since we talked about a phased migration, automatically inserts interfacing tasks to your existing workload automation solution to manage the cross dependencies. These are basically the green jobs here that have the cross dependencies. And Now Automate is our workload automation solution. So basically, we segment different pieces, as I said earlier, by business unit, by application area, and our automation suite automatically detects where the cross dependencies to what's already running in your existing tool that we are not migrating at this time, and it creates the appropriate interface tasks so you can run your entire workload in two systems, and we take care of the cross dependencies. And then if we look at the next slide, the question is, what do we do about the specific parts of a given workload automation suite that is typically difficult to migrate? And one of the things we do is we have compatibility layers for the different solutions out there. So for example, there's a product called Atomic that is known for having complex scripting capabilities. And those are typically difficult to re-engineer. So instead of having to re-engineer those scripts, we have a compatibility layer that allows you to run those scripts without any changes. That allows you to preserve your investment in these scripts, and that decouples any re-architecting from the actual migration project. That reduces the risk, that makes it a lot easier, reduces the effort, and you can always take care of these scripts at a later time if you so choose. But the other thing is also that some of these scripts actually are no longer needed. Same with other workarounds that we see in some of the systems. If a system was written 10, 20, 30 years ago, certain things were very cumbersome to achieve, and we can very easily replace them with features we already have in the product. So we have 500 plus integrations currently with other solutions, AWS, ServiceNow, Kubernetes, all the different environments that are out there today. But we also have something we call the Infinite Integration Builder that allows either our service team or your own team to easily create an integration of anything we don't support out of the box directly. So basically, we help you on the integration side, but we also always reserve development capacity for anything that we see in the analysis phase, where there's any functionality gap or any special situation where we say a feature in the product would make a migration a lot easier for the client. So again, the objective is to get rid of the complexity in the current environment and replace it with something that is much easier to understand. We've recently been working with a client that has a very complex script that's very hard to understand for the file transfers. That has to do with their current file watcher scenario. And we're able to completely do away with this scripting with 2 mouse clicks in the product, because that's already supported by our advanced file sensors. So something that would take a lot of training for people to understand, make it hard to bring new staff on board, is now replaced with something that you can easily see in the product, what is going on. And that again makes it a lot easier for everybody to support a larger workload and bring new people on board.
It's interesting, Gert, that in that specific example, you would think something as mundane, and we all know it isn't actually mundane, but as a file transfer could be that radically different in its implementation. But uniquenesses that they wanted to take advantage of in that scripting years ago is now just a feature, right? In a more modern version of your product, which the very nature of it being, organized as a feature just makes it simpler to understand, easier to maintain, and less option for error than the script would have been.
Exactly. And that again reduces the risk of ongoing operation also. Next slide, please.
Great. There you go.
And so as a final part of our discussion on the migration approach, what happens with the stuff that can't directly be migrated? We don't just spit out an error and stop migrating a certain definition if we find an error. We actually create that definition in our system, but we tag it with what we found is missing or is invalid. Oftentimes that happens because people have we can call it technical debt, old stuff, things that no longer really runs, that has some issues that maybe the current system doesn't really detect, that cyclic dependencies on jobs that are no longer there, variable dependencies where the variable is no longer there. We detect all of these things. We allow you to import them into the system, but we flag them, as you can see, with the red flags here. And then it is very easily to go in there and either delete the task if you say this is no longer running, add the variable, resolve the cyclic dependency, whatever needs to be done. So that makes it a lot easier to manage a large project by looking at these scenarios, taking care of them, and the system detects that they're really, resolved and working. So that was just a very short introduction to what such a migration project looks like. But we can talk about that for hours, so feel free to contact me after the webinar, and we'll be happy to talk more about that.
Yeah, I think, Gert, the clearly as a partner, you all have experience with the project side of it, and you certainly know your product inside and out. So, I know that there's all kinds of very fun and interesting migration stories when I hang out with some of your migration folks. You know, the littlest things will pop up, and the creative answers, you know, are there amongst the teams that do this regularly across multiple clients. There's a lot of creative people who put a lot of effort into making this less painful, and it can be. Another reason for the change isn't just the bit of AI we expect to be coming now and some of the other rising, you know, orchestration issues, but this is a trend that's just begun. There's going to be years of advancements here that you'll miss out on if you're not connected with the right product. We're going to see enterprise-wide orchestration really growing. I mean, Gert, you all just created your orchestration product as part of the A Now suite, and really we're one of the first to be looking at observability. I'm sorry, the observability part of the A Now suite, and you're really one of the first to specifically apply observability to workload automation, which is, I think, very interesting. Well, I think we're going to see more of that across the market.
Yes, and I think we need to distinguish between, let's call it, passive observability, where you just load certain data into one of the more generic platforms like Datadog or Splunk or something like that, that you can take, you know, certain conclusions out of that, gain some insights, and what we call active observability, where you actually can provide recommendations and execute the recommendations directly out of the observability component. So you have an interaction between the workload automation engine and the observability engine. And maybe just to explain why I'm talking about two different engines. This is something to do with the architecture again. When you architect a workload automation solution, you're looking at throughput and performance. So for example, we have benchmarked our workload automation engine up to 20 million tasks per day. And then we kind of stopped because you know, we could probably scale it even more. It's a cloud native product, microservices architecture based. But you know, we have a high performance engine for executing workloads, but that architecture is not ideal for observability and everything that has to do with deep analysis and insights. So we have a separate engine that basically is in real-time communication with the workload automation engine to allow you to really gain these deep insights, analyze the data, get recommendations, execute those recommendations. And that's kind of the way forward in order to enable more and more AI usage in observability to really, you know, optimize and be proactive in optimization and error prevention. And another part is what we just have released is not just an observability engine for our own workload automation product, but it is actually vendor neutral. We support multiple workload automation engines, and we're adding more and more over time in order to allow you both a phased implementation of our workload automation engine, as well as use cases where you may be running multiple workload automation engines in the future.
Yes, and we even had conversations when we were talking about where this might head, that there's an opportunity even to orchestrate across schedulers as they have the ability to now start observing some of the other tools. It will really improve the ability of a system to be both resilient, self-healing, you know, first of all, self-aware, and then self-healing. This is really going to advance that. And it's not just in workload tools that we're seeing this. I think AI is changing a lot of the classes of tools, which sometimes then raises the question, well, won't AI just replace workload automation? I don't think that it will in that way. Workload automation will change radically because of AI over the next couple of years, and it will, but the knowledge of how to keep these environments and these systems running, the SLA awareness, there's so much around workload automation that I think as it increases its AI use, AI will end up taking over, but it will be within many of these tools we're currently familiar with. I don't think there's a wholesale AI displacement. The needs are still here for all of the coordination and orchestration, but it will absolutely change a lot in the way it's done over the next 4 or 5 years. And so again, not just the capabilities that are available today are imminent, but is the arc of the roadmap for the vendor that you're with suitable for the arc of your own roadmap? That would really be what I would be keeping my eye on. And then even in this list of all this cool new stuff, here's cloud and multi-cloud, right? It's been around a long time. It's nowhere near as new, but the volume of real production workloads that are moving to the cloud is radically increasing. Even though it's a lot of the work already, it's probably about 30, maybe 30% is run in public cloud, another 14% or so in hybrid. So there's still plenty in on-prem and other locations, but more and more is moving to the cloud, and having good cloud capabilities is a key part of any tool that you're going to want to be using. And then the last area here is we're really starting to see this tool and other classes of tools. It's coming from ITSM software. It's coming from some observability platforms as well. But the ability to let non-coders define automations, or and this concept of citizen developers. So many of the workload tools are broadening what could be automated to include more human in the loop kinds of processes, with more of this business, outcome focus instead of just pure IT focus of I have to get X, Y, or Z done. But what does that file moving have to do with a broader business process? Can we let business people or other folks in operations who aren't developers create and define some of their own automations, and yet create the guardrails around them to make sure it's done well? This is just beginning, but again, if you're not with the tool with the right roadmap, if you feel behind now, you're gonna really feel behind when more of this stuff starts to show up, and you're going to see this yet this year from several tools. Gert, I don't know if you have anything else to add here.
Yes, and I think sometimes we are asked, how can I justify this to management to migrate my workload automation engine with all of the business initiatives that we have going on? And I think one way to look at it is, you're moving into the cloud for a reason. You're not just moving platforms and getting rid of your own hardware, but you're also moving into new development architectures of how you develop your applications. You're not having the old static monolithic code of the 90s and the 2000s. You have a much more modern approach to development that allows you to be more agile, faster, have more reusable code, a lot of advantages of how we develop applications these days. But as you go into that world, you also need to modernize your tool stack because you need the support to integrate with these platforms, but you also need the scalability that is required that these older platforms simply cannot support.
And if to continue that thought, this modernization isn't just about today; it's about what's coming, right? I mean, I know I'm really hitting this hard, but I think there's as much change has happened in this market the last 15 years. The pace is actually picking up, and it's significant. So for me, I'll be doing my radar report again this year. We're gearing up to do that right now. And I had to change it more this time than I ever had, to bring in the observability, the AI, the orchestration, the human in the loop processes. A lot of that is I'm starting to measure for the first time. And there will be capabilities and features measured yet this year, I know, in the roadmaps of a number of these products. And that's just the tip of what will happen over the next 3 or 4 years. So as we look at, the what's coming side of this, AI-driven orchestration, the autonomous decision-making to adapt workflows in real time. I mean, we have some dynamic capabilities today, but this is going to radically increase the ability. And when when you pair this with more and more stuff running in a containerized world, it has a lot of impact to both effort and productivity to stand up and tear down all those environments. It has impact to meeting SLAs, to cost, to performance. So those who are on the leading edge of this are going to be making gains on all those fronts while others aren't. And then as observability rises up, I mean, this really becomes bi-directional context sharing. The workload tools themselves have to be observable in the grander scheme, and they can benefit from observed data about individual jobs. I think when we get to the idea of, isn't AI just going to ultimately displace workload? Well, actually, the concept of agentic AI means that something's going to be orchestrating, and I don't think there's going to emerge a single orchestrator here. The big areas where we're seeing a lot of agentic capabilities around ERP systems, around ITSM systems, around the workload automation systems, RPA, and observability. So I think you're going to see agents coming from a lot of angles, but they're going to have to be coordinated amongst themselves. That's kind of the role of workload. And I think we're going to see more agentic orchestration emerging in these tools. So yeah, the landscape is radically changing. I don't think the need for this orchestration goes away. There still needs to be some kind of central control. And I think these tools will be it, but they will be radically different 5 years from now. Human in the loop orchestration, we talked about that a bit. That's coming. A lot of, how your automations are defined is like little micro coding, keeping track of all of that through the DevOps process. So Git processes, whether that's GitLabs or GitHub, and different ways that you might do that. Automation is really being pulled in around that DevOps cycle. That's another big area of change. And if you're not yet automating that and your tool doesn't support that well, there's a big key one to be mindful of. And then just the idea of the low code, no code, the citizen developer extensibility. My 2024 research, we had 28% let non-developers create automation definitions for production. The balance of the market is still experimenting. So this is just emerging, but it's on the horizon. So really, you want to make sure that if these things are going to be important to your organization, you're aligned with the platform that can get you there. So with that, really thought we'd wrap up with, what should drive your portfolio or your platform decision, right? And it may be a portfolio of automation products. It may not be a single one, but you probably have one to go to. And, as you're considering, if and when and what to change that to, I think, we've highlighted throughout this presentation, is your current vendor the right partner? I think, that's a key concept. And I know, Gert, you've got some thoughts on that.
Yes, and we hear from a lot of clients that one of the main reasons they get driven to look at a replacement now and not later is that they feel the partnership they had with their current vendor no longer really exists. They're being asked to pay much more for the same solution they've been running for decades. The support is lacking. The development, ongoing development of the product is lacking. And they just don't feel that the partner really has the best of the client themselves in mind, but more, is looking at maximizing revenue on their cost. And they're looking for somebody that is a fair partner in terms of pricing, in terms of the terms, predictability of costs, but also has excellent support, migration capabilities, and is aggressively developing the product in the direction they're going. As you said, cloud, multi-cloud, AI, observability.
And certainly beyond on partner, what modern features would you use if you had them? If there's things missing in your product, how is that impacting you? And is the roadmap from that vendor going to align with your future needs? Are they delivering these things as you're needing them, or do you find yourself waiting on them? Are you optimizing for easier integration? Is your partner company creating the integrations you need? And are they bringing that stronger AI and the better cloud support? And, really, finally, are you working around limitations, or are you building with advantage? It's really, with all of what's happening, it's time to stop with the workarounds and make sure you've got, the tool that brings you the advantage. With that, we'll move to the Q&A, and I will turn it back to Raleigh.
Great. Thank you, Dan. If you have any questions, please log them now. Starting with you, Dan. We know migration is painful. What's actually driving teams to take it on now?
I think, it depends on where you are in that life cycle. There's certainly more and more measures of automation increasing, right? I've noticed more executives in IT, when I ask in a survey, are you measured on increasing automation? It's like 40-some%, 44%, I think, in 2024, from about 30% just 5 years or so ago. So the idea that automation, without it, you're limited. You're not able to take advantage of the new things. Think about automating data and all of the data moving, and now how important data is to AI. So, as the importance of data for AI rises, so does the importance of all of the data pipelines that are being automated and managed to get it where it's going in the right and timely fashion. So, it's pain points either around, legacy things where they've had workarounds for years, but they're starting to see changes in staff where, it's harder to train new people, or they just don't have enough trained people. They need tools that do more. So, different organizations have different reasons, but there's a good half dozen reasons, and you can walk into almost any organization and see 5 or 6 of them. And when I talk to a lot of organizations, that's what I'm seeing.
And Dan, how long does it really take to see value after switching to a new WLA platform?
Sometimes it's immediately with the first job that's running. It may still be months later before you feel the benefit of the last job, but Gert talked about the issues with the file transfer capabilities, and when the sensing and the handling is tied up in scripts that were written 10 years ago, and folks don't necessarily understand some of the reasons why, or some of the controls that are there, and yet in a different tool, that's a built-in feature when you configure it, and it's straightforward, and it's the same for every file. You get that benefit immediately the first day you run that job, and the next time you have to change it. So it's a series of benefits strung out over a migration period with other bumps in the road, let's be honest. But the benefits can start to accrue very quickly.
Good to know. Thanks, Dan. Gert, jumping over to you, when is the best time to start migration relative to the renewal date of our existing solution?
And that's a good question. But reality is that it has less to do with the renewal date and more about what is in your future. Are you going to have more workload to migrate in the future, or less? Are you going to have more resources, more people in the future, or less? So my take is, for most organizations, the best time to start the project is now, to prepare for the future. A good vendor will always work with you on the financial conditions in the time when you're running 2 systems in parallel before the renewal date, or before you can get rid of the other system. But the key element is that you really want to use the time you have now before you have larger increases in workloads through all of the cloud, all of the AI projects, and so that are coming in most organizations.
Thanks for those insights, Gert. How important are the underlying architectural differences between different solutions, and why do they matter?
They matter because obviously, as we just talked about with the integrations, your workload automation suite has to be able to integrate with new technologies as they come along, and they come along very quickly now. I mentioned we have 500 integrations now, but there's still solutions that we find that we don't integrate with, and we have to add those. The older solutions that are based on a more monolithic architecture have a hard time doing these things just because of the way they were architected at the time they were written. With a modern microservices-based product, you can develop much faster, you can roll out new capabilities much faster, new integrations, those kind of things. And at the same time, you have a whole different level of scalability through the use of more modern cloud technologies so that you can scale to the workload that's coming in the future, and you don't have to worry about running out of steam at some point in time.
Thank you,
Sorry
Gert.
about that.
Thank you, Gert. Let's take one final question. There's a lot of noise in the market. How do we know we're picking the right partner, not just the right product?
And I think that comes to what we talked about before in terms of what is the pricing? What are the terms? A lot of customers feel they've been surprised by their vendors. So we try to be very fair. Just as an example, we price by average workload during the month, so we don't penalize the customer for any peaks they have on weekends, month ends, whatever. We price on production only. We don't penalize you for testing your applications well. We have a very simple, easy to understand pricing structure, and we guarantee your pricing no matter whether you go with a 3-year term or a 5-year term. We guarantee our pricing for 10 years so that you have a predictable outlook of what a renewal is going to look like. You don't have to renew, but if you choose to renew, you already know what your cost is going to be. There are no surprises. So I think that's one big part of it. The other part, as I mentioned before, is the support that you get, the training that you get from your vendor, the migration support, and the aggressive ongoing development to be able to tackle the requirements of the future.
That's great. Thank you, Gert, and thank you, Dan, for your insights. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email that will include today's on-demand playback, as well as a link to access your complimentary copy of the radar report for workload automation. So I hope you'll check out the email, and I hope we'll see you at a future email research webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.